This is Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, and I want to thank the witnesses for your patience with us here today. A couple of real quick questions. When did Israel pull out of Gaza?
In 2005, yes.
And who was in control after Israel left?
Well, initially the PA, and then there was a coup, so it was Hamas after that.
And when did the coup happen?
2007.
Right. And since 2007, when Gaza violently threw out Fatah and took over Gaza, how many escalatory conflicts have there been between Israel and Hamas that have resulted in a negotiated ceasefire?
At least 6.
At least 6.
And they have been very tenuous ceasefires. They've been good for a couple days, good for a couple months, and then they've collapsed.
Yeah. When was the last ceasefire negotiated before this conflict?
2021.
I think it was May 19th, 2021, 870 days before October 7th. What was the status of the ceasefire on October 6th? Was Israel observing it?
Well, yes, of course. I would say that it was a sort of on and off again affair because you occasionally had rockets and so forth pop off. So, yep.
But Israel was observing it. And so I'm going to ask obvious questions. We've touched on these over the course of the day. And again, thank you for your time. But who violated the ceasefire on October 7th?
Very clearly Hamas.
Who slaughtered 260 young people at a music festival on October 7th?
That would be Hamas.
Who murdered more than 130 people at Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th?
Hamas.
Who butchered children at a nursery in Kibbutz Kfar Aza on October 7th?
Hamas.
Right. Is it a war crime to intentionally target civilians?
Absolutely.
War crime to use rape and torture as a tactic?
Absolutely.
To burn people alive in their homes?
Absolutely.
To take more than 240 people hostage?
Absolutely.
To deny those people who they took hostage visits from the International Committee of the Red Cross or the necessary health care?
Absolutely.
Is it a war crime to use an ambulance to transport fighters and weapons?
Yes, it is.
How about to launch rockets from civilian neighborhoods, from hospitals, mosques, and schools?
Yes, it is.
Using human shields, is that a war crime?
It is.
So let me ask a broader question, because we have talked about this war, and we went through a rapid-fire list of questions. But let me be very clear. I see the suffering of the civilians in this war. It's the civilians who always get caught in the middle of the war. I've said that many times. And we need to bring this war to as rapid conclusion as is humanly possible, because the civilians in Gaza and in Israel are suffering. Almost 1 million people have been displaced in Gaza. Almost 250,000 people have been displaced in Israel. But what would happen if Israel were to agree to a ceasefire before dismantling Hamas's ability to fight or to rule over Gaza?
Congressman, you put your finger on the issue right here, and I would agree completely with you. The suffering in Gaza among civilians is wrenching. It's emotionally wrenching for all of us who are working on this issue. It is wrenching for the governments and the publics in the Middle East who are watching this. And on the other hand, to call a ceasefire right now, which might or might not be honored by Hamas, would be to leave Hamas in control of 240-some hostages, including babies and children, and would also leave fairly well intact or much of the military infrastructure and war-fighting capacity and terrorism capacity of Hamas intact.
Let me build on that for 1 second, because you used 2 terms I think are important to distinguish: war-fighting and terrorism. What is war-fighting? And maybe, Ms. Stroll, that's the question for the Department of Defense. What does it mean to say war-fighting?
It means to use military force to achieve an objective.
Okay. Distinct from terrorism, though. Terrorism is crossing a border, beheading babies, raping women, killing concertgoers. Its intention is to cause trauma and terror to an entire society. Isn't that correct?
The point is terror. The war fighting is soldier on soldier. But as we saw on October 7th, what Hamas did was in no way a war. It was pure terrorism.
And has it been United States message, President Biden, and let me say this, thank goodness for President Biden. His moral clarity and political courage in this conflict has been just extraordinary. I know it is appreciated by the people in Israel, and it should be equally appreciated by the people in the United States and around the world. But has he made it clear that Israel has a right to defend itself, but when we talk about that is in the context of war fighting?
Absolutely, and it has an obligation to defend its people from terrorism and from the kind of attacks that we saw on October 7th.
Right. I'm out of time. Let me comment on 2 last things. One is a quote that you said at the very beginning in your opening remarks. The U.S. commitment to Israel is ironclad. We've said that. The President has said that. Is it fair to also say that the U.S. commitment, as it has been in Camp David, in bringing peace to Egypt and Israel, in the Oslo Accords, in the negotiations between Jordan and Israel for peace, in the leadership it has showed in the Abraham Accords, it's also fair that the United States is also committed to bringing peace to both Israel and the Palestinians once Hamas is defeated?
Absolutely, and it's the only way that we will not see a terrible repetition of these events.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.